In women's health, there's often a long stretch where the science works, but nothing seems to move. Investors grow impatient, founders are judged, and real progress is mistaken for failure.
Most companies fail at that midpoint. Something happens, their product isn't what it's meant to be or what they thought it was going to be. Make no mistake, I knew that was a do or die year, right? In fact, I would argue a do or die 6 months. We had to execute on what we need to do. Including, by the way,
it's less about, say, a single technology, but more about moving innovation through systems that might be resistant to change because Skip Baldino has spent over 4 decades taking medical technologies through that invisible middle, from FDA approval to reimbursement to adoption to scale. As former CEO of Gynesonics, acquired by Hologic for $350 million, and now a board member at Channel Med Systems, he's seen what it actually takes to build conviction before consensus.
That middle part of the journey,
yes,
that's the part that makes all the difference in the world, right? Because
I'm Marianne Self, this is Blind Spot Capital, and today we're going inside the middle, where real value is built long before the market recognizes it. In women's health, there's often a long stretch where everyone agrees the science works and yet nothing seems to move. That gap can last years. Inside it, entrepreneurs are judged, investors grow impatient, and real progress is often mistaken for failure. Today's conversation lives inside that gap and what it actually takes to move a women's health medical technology through the system. Skip Baldino spent his career leading medical device companies through complex commercialization journeys, including most recently as the CEO of Gynesonics, which was acquired by Hologic last year for $350 million. He now sits on the board of Channel Med Systems, putting him back inside the system, but from a very different seat. Skip, it's great to have you with me.
Yeah, great to be here, Marianne. Thank you for the invite.
You're very welcome. So, Skip, if someone is listening to this episode, just logged into this podcast and hearing you for the first time, I don't want to start with where you've been. I want to start with your life work itself. What problem have you spent most of your career actually trying to solve?
That's a good question. I mean, look, I've been in healthcare for 40 plus years, so I think it's safe to say that the biggest opportunity for me was to bring innovative technologies to the marketplace to basically solve issues that existed that there really wasn't a better solution. So to be able to bring, minimally invasive technologies that literally became gold standards, I think that was always the goal, both at Abbott, where I spent 26 years and had the opportunity to work for some really great people and bring some great products to market, to then going from the large company to the small companies where I was with an Israeli company called Given Imaging, where we had what was proprietary was the main product was called PillCam. Mm-hmm. And it was really to solve obscure GI bleeding. Prior to that capsule, that little very small capsule that people ingested, you used to have to do an upper endoscopy and a colonoscopy to be able to find out why people might be bleeding internally. So you think about that was a dramatic change and much improved way to treat the disease. And so from there, I went to a GERD company, ran that company where, again, instead of doing a major surgical procedure, doing a minimally invasive procedure to actually correct the anatomical situation that causes GERD. That was another really, really nice opportunity to help and bring some benefits to society. Mm-hmm. And then Gynesonics, obviously, I'm really excited about what we did there because that was a situation where, as you know all too well, women's healthcare has been very much underserved. Mm-hmm. And hysterectomies in particular, while they're a very, very good procedure and many times the right solution, they're overused in my opinion. And so we had a procedure on the Sonata system that literally allowed us to ablate symptomatic fibroids in a very minimally way and be able to do that and preserve the uterus and not necessarily have to take the organ out like you do with a hysterectomy. And women have gotten tremendous benefits from that.
Mm. It's interesting when you talk about hysterectomy and being widely used and, in your opinion, maybe used too much. I was reading a statistic the other day that said, I think the research showed that less than 10% of hysterectomies actually for like cancer or life-threatening conditions. And so that kind of says the bulk of hysterectomies are actually for problems that perhaps there could be better alternatives. And when you talk about your life work, I think one of the threads I picked up from what you said is this thread that runs through improving care through minimally invasive procedures.
Yeah.
So when you look across the companies that you've worked with, from Abbott to Gynesonics to Channel Med Systems, where you now sit on the board, what hasn't changed about that problem?
I mean, look, there's a lot of Me Too products out there. And one of the things that happens is when you're a physician, it's an unbelievably extensive period of time to be trained to be a physician when you're in school. And so when you graduate, you've got a significant amount of training in products that currently exist today when you get out of training. So what happens is as new novel technologies are introduced that actually could be, and many times are better for the patient, it's very understandable that they've been trained on this, they're good at this, their colleagues do this, existing procedures. So there's a tendency to just continue that when in fact there are these better technologies out there. And I think, women's healthcare, it's actually unique from the standpoint, if you think about an OBGYN, though, and again, all specialties care about their patients. I don't want to take that the wrong way. But if you think about an OBGYN, a lot of times they have the same patient from that first period all the way through menopause and sometimes thereafter. So there's an even more of a perspective that you don't want to do any harm to a patient.
Yes.
Because one, you're going to see her again and again and again. You're going to likely see her daughters. And so because of that, you really, when you bring out a novel technology like the Sonata as an example, or the Serene technology with the company you just talked about, Channel, these have to be proven without a shadow of a doubt in order for them to be adopted, in the mainstream by OBGYNs and GYN surgeons, right? So my whole career, there's been different scenarios that exist. But if you think about surgery, like surgeons versus OBGYNs, they're more apt to believe and make a change quicker because, again, they're confident in what they do and they've been trained to adopt to new technologies. A lot of specialties are not that way, and OBGYNs are very much that way. They're very likely to stay with the safest, most proven procedure, even though there's data that shows that the new procedures are just as good, if not better.
Yeah. So I think if I listen to you, it's from the start, it's less about, say, a single technology, but more about moving innovation through systems that might be resistant to change because they'd rather stick with known, proven technologies in their duty of care to the patient.
Yeah, I mean, think about it. They've been trained, let's just use hysterectomies as an example. They've been trained on that and they've done many, many procedures. And again, no one ever gets judged by doing a hysterectomy, right?
Yes.
Like if you think about, it's a proven technology, it's accepted. Many people just do that, right? Well, where it's more difficult is to be someone that's got cutting edge technology in front of them, and and we have a lot of these people in all the businesses I've been in. You have to have people that are willing to be the early adopters,
Yes,
that have the courage and the conviction to do what's right for the patient, which may be better for the patient. And so that's the issue, right? At the end of the day, you have to get people comfortable that it's a better procedure. And that takes time, and that takes clinical studies, and that takes outcomes data and economic outcomes. And then on top of that, you've got the payer industry, right? The payer community, by and large, it's a zero-sum game, right? They pay for existing technology. So if you want to bring a new technology to market and have them pay for it, that means it's extra cost for them because they typically very rarely sunset a product. So if something's been out there for 20 years and it's been accepted, they very rarely take that out of the budget and stop approving that procedure unless there's some issue with the procedure. But by and large, traditional procedures are continued to be approved. So when you're trying to get them to pay for something, it's incremental. And obviously that's not what payers really want to do. They have budgets, and it's not necessarily always zero sum, but it's close to zero sum budgets. So you really have to convince them that not only will this save money, it's better for patients, and ultimately downstream costs will be saved by doing this procedure.
So let's talk about moving and innovation through a system, because you've actually started touching on that. You've spent years, in some cases, at some of your previous employers, you spent close to a decade leading companies through complex commercial journeys,
Sure.
including Gynesonics, which we just talked about. When people hear commercial CEO or successful exit, I guess they're often imagining constant forward momentum, but most of the work happens in the middle, after you have that initial optimism, long before anything is certain. And so when you think about that early middle, say at Gynesonics or even at other like Abbott, for example,
Sure.
especially given everything you've lived through earlier in your career, you've taken companies through 3 M&A exits. What did that early middle period actually feel like?
I mean, so I'll give you some general answers. I would tell you the journey that takes place from having a novel idea. So you have a founder, or you have a scientist that says, "Hey, I think this product could be a game changer. This might fill an unmet need." I would tell you that the hurdles to take that novel product that you think may fit an unmet need through the entire journey of getting you to not only be approved by the FDA or CE mark, to be able to get your reimbursement, you've got to get category 1, then you've got to get reimbursement, and you've got to get a value. So you've got all these steps that you have to go through. None of that's easy. And none of that, if you're a brand new founder, I think it's believed that, this is not that hard. You just got to get somebody to invest in your idea. And then, off we go. I would tell you, and I'm going to use Gynesonics as an example, I'm the last CEO of Gynesonics. However, I'll say this, we joke about it being an overnight success because, you get sold and all that, but it was a 20-year journey, which is not uncommon for medtech startups. There are so many medtech startups that take a couple of decades to be able to get from early idea all the way through that process where you're now the standard of care, like we are with Sonata, all right? And I would tell you, to your point about the middle stages, a lot of the work was done at this company by a really strong management team well before I got there. I mean, the clinical trials take years to be able to, one, start and finish, but then get the desired outcome. The amount of iterations on the product to be able to take it from being able to be successful in a one-off laboratory environment to be able to scale it so that you can produce it in a way that will not have any issues with full market access. I mean, that's enormous. And to your point, that takes a lot of time. And I've been fortunate to be around some really good people who are passionate about what they do, people who are really gifted with what they do. And I would tell you that we've also been blessed by, you have to have good investors. You have to have people who believe in what you're doing. And again, one of the topics you wanted to talk about was women's health and why there hasn't been more investment there. I would tell you, I'll just speak to Gynesonics. I would tell you, when I joined, it was a very difficult situation. Again, we'd have been out there, it's a 2-decade-old company. And I joined before the 20-year anniversary, which, by the way, was the month we sold the business. But I can tell you that at the time, the team had made great progress. There had been multiple CEOs over the course of that time frame. But what happened was, like a lot of VCs have 10-year funds. Okay, so they have enough money. They raise money and they talk to the investors about getting their money back over the course of that 10 years. And there's usually extensions of 1, 2, 3 years. But it gets very difficult after that period of time to still have money available for your portfolio. So in a case of Gynesonics, while the team had made very considerable progress, Marianne, over that time frame, the investors, they had concerns about the commercial growth and how long it was taking, and they also had concerns over the cash burn. We were spending a lot of money during those times, and so with that, we had a majority of investors just before I joined that were unwilling or unable to invest more. So we had a dilemma, like how do they keep the company going?
Yes.
And when they have concerns about, all types of things, right? And I can tell you, we had 2 investors, 2 of the original investors, 2 of the current syndicate, AMZAC Health Partners, which was led by Joyce Aroney, and then Endeavor Health Partners, which was Alex Schmidt. And they decided to stay in. And it took a lot of courage and a lot of conviction to be able to do that, because without them staying in, the company was gone. And so there was a complete recap. We refinanced the debt. I joined, and over a very short period of time, like a couple of weeks into it, Silicon Valley Bank went bankrupt. I don't know if you remember that, but
Yes.
Silicon Valley Bank was where most startups, VCs get their money from,
Yes.
right? So all of a sudden, you not only have them going bankrupt, but you have an inability to get your money out. And what I thought was amazing, and it meant a lot to the employees, was that AMZAC and Endeavor agreed that while we were trying to get our money out, which ultimately we got out before we needed to take this action, they agreed to bankroll the payroll, right? They agreed to make sure that we paid the employees during this period of time that was very, very difficult, right? Now, again, our CFO, Robert Brown, did a great job to actually get our money out and into another bank, so we didn't need that. But it meant a lot to have an investor syndicate like those two that were able to stay in and keep us going. Now, with that, then the challenge became, how do I keep my employees, right? How do I keep the folks that have built this business and had taken us to what I thought was a very, very, final chapter that needed to be done. And I can tell you, having met the people and spent a lot of time with them over the first couple of months, Marianne, I realized we had a really great team that had a tremendous amount of passion for bringing this technology to market and helping the women that we knew this could serve. So that was a very, very tough period of time for a lot of reasons. You have people who, had been invested. Some of the people were there the entire 20 years, or at that time, say 17 years, and their stock was wiped out because when you recap a company, not only do the investors lose their money, but all the stock options are done. So I had to convince them to stay and give them new options and have them believe that we could get there. And quite frankly, it was pretty easy. They believed in what we could do. They just needed to know that we could put the right strategies and tactics in place. We could raise the amount of money we needed to be able to get to the finish line with the company. And that's ultimately what happened.
And it ties into, I think the next question I wanted to talk to you about was something you said to me about commercialization. And, we're talking about the battlefield of commercialization. And you said to me, look, Marianne, it's largely the same, across men and women's health. So I guess the question is, if this system is the same, where does the expectation gap actually come from in women's health? I know you've talked about, investors kind of mispricing the time that it takes, but what other factors contribute to that?
Well, I mean, look, the investors have LPs. They have their own investors, limited partners that give them the money to put the work to give them a good return. Now, most of them, I would tell you, have an interest in not only making a great return for themselves and their LPs, but they also care deeply about investing in products that make a difference, right? Yes. And I know that sounds like a mom and apple pie, but I can tell you, I would say in all the investors I've dealt with in my career, I would say I do see that all the time, that they care about what they do. I mean, you can invest in Me Too products and it's safer and they could probably make a good return on that. But all the people that invest in these, what I would call these medtech startups are people who care about changing the paradigm, right? And so when you ask, okay, and I made the comment to you when we first talked that, I do think the blocking and tackling, the amount of work to get from initial idea all the way through to where you have not only a product that works, it's approved, that it's getting covered, but also becomes mainstream. That's a journey that is enormous, and there are pitfalls every step of the way, whether it's men or women's health, right? I can tell you that happens all the time. However, what I would tell you, I don't know the reasons why. You and I can have our suspicions, but there haven't been a lot of great outcomes in women's healthcare, right? So if you're an investor who has a mandate to get a return for your investors, and you care deeply about bringing products to market that make a difference, of course you want to do that in women's health as well. But I'll give you an example. If you look at BPH for men, there is dozens of companies that have invested to bring a solution for prostate issues, right? When you look at heavy menstrual bleeding, which is what Channel, you talk about the new company I'm involved with,
yes.
What they do, there's just not been a lot of investment, yet it's a significant issue. I mean, there's I want to say 10 million people, 10 million women a year annually that have issues with heavy menstrual bleeding.
Yes.
These are new patients that come into the healthcare looking for a solution. Channel is a great example of one that they have a unique solution, which we don't have to talk about necessarily. That's not the purpose for this. But they have a really strong syndicate. We have the opportunity to make a huge difference. But it's shocking to think that you have all these BPH solutions that are out there. Some work better than others, but you have an offering. And yet for heavy menstrual bleeding, you don't have a lot of good options, right? And again, I go back to, sometimes the option is you take the organ out, you have a hysterectomy, right? That's really not the right solution. And I can tell you, I'm not sure why that happens, but I'm excited about the go forward plan, because I can tell you, if you think about our Hologic's acquisition of Gynesonics, it was a really good return for our investors.
Yes.
Right. And then Blackstone buying Hologic, I think, also is a very powerful message to women's healthcare.
Yes.
Because Blackstone, they don't make a lot of mistakes. I mean, they're an incredible company that they do a significant amount of due diligence. And for them to get into the women's healthcare arena means that they see a benefit, not only from a society standpoint, but they see a massive return opportunity for their investors, right? So I think that's good. There's other companies doing it too. There's a company called Labrie who, over the last, I want to say 12 years, their parent company has bought, I want to say 11 or 12 companies. 4 of them have been women's healthcare companies, right? So again, people are starting to become aware of the opportunity, right? I can't speak to why it wasn't done earlier. I can only say now there's some litmus tests that show that if you invest in this, you can make money and do the right thing for society, right? And I think I'm excited about what that can mean for Channel and other companies as well, right?
Yeah, no, I agree. I think the acquisition of Hologic by Blackstone was a very strong signal for women's healthcare. And in my mind, I guess the question, I'd love to hear your take on this, Skip. What does that mean for entrepreneurs? What should they be optimizing for, to get that sort of exit, or to get that sort of attention, or to keep that attention going on women's healthcare?
Yeah. Well, I think you mean in terms of the Blackstone acquisition or just generally?
In general, for entrepreneurs in
I'll give you
women's
2
health.
answers. I'll say for Blackstone, I think it's good because Blackstone, when they acquire companies, they're looking for growth, right?
Yes.
And I can tell you candidly, Hologic's business was growing very, very nicely. They have 3 different divisions. I can say that in the GYN surgical space, there's a tremendous opportunity to improve the growth trajectory for that division. And I can tell you, there's a lot of companies out there now that Blackstone's there. I do believe that many opportunities will come to the smaller companies that are looking to actually get sold to larger companies so that they can scale that product faster. Because make no mistake, when you look at, I'll just use Hologic. Hologic has 200 people in the U.S., 200 salespeople in the U.S., roughly, maybe a little bit more than that. But when you're a startup, you cannot afford to hire 200 people. So what you end up doing is in our case, we had about 13 territories in the United States and 13 or so in Europe. And maybe 20 people, counting clinical people in both regions. What you want to do is have a proven concept that if you can build in those territories a strong, sustainable business where you can have recurring business, companies like Hologic will then in turn figure out, okay, with my 200 plus people, with all the United States being covered, in Europe, et cetera, Asia Pacific, we can explode this business and we can actually get a return while also making a huge dent in the healthcare landscape, with our procedure, right? So I think if you're a startup, I'll go back to just generally.
Yes.
If you're a startup, you have to be able to have a proven concept. You have to be able to be relatively bulletproof on all aspects. You have to have clinical outcomes that make sense. You have to have economic data that proves that you get great outcomes, but it's not going to cost healthcare more because payers don't want to pay for that. Hospitals don't want to pay for something that's going to cost more. You have to be able to show that physicians can make money doing the procedure because at the end of the day, they want to do what's right. But if they get 8 hours a day to do procedures and they're losing money on yours and they're making a lot more money doing others, the natural human nature is they're going to do more of the other stuff, right? So you have to be economical, you have to be clinically, you have to actually make money for the physicians and the facility, and then ultimately you've got to be able to prove to ultimately the strategics that your business is scalable, right? And to do that, you need to be able to perform in your territories. There's a lot of startups that have products that they have dabblers. They have a lot of customers that do 1 or 2 here and there, and quite frankly, that was the case in the U.S. when I first joined. Is that there wasn't we didn't have category 1. And even with category 1, we still had people that were just, doing it for that perfect patient. And once we got more and more of our customers to actually see the benefits of using Sonata with more patients, that they saw on a day-to-day basis. That's where the growth of the business accelerated. So for a startup, they need to do the same thing. Channel's involved with that right now. Channel has a lot of customers, and they have a subset of those customers that do a lot of procedures. They're a perfect example with more investment and more ability to go faster. They've got a great solution. We need the money to be able to invest in a commercial ramp, and they're in the process of doing that. You have to do that. Otherwise, you just can't make it. There's a lot of companies that have 20 sales reps and do very little at each account, and therefore strategics view them as a science project or a niche product instead of a mainstream product.
Right. So if I could summarize that is design with clinical relevance in mind, proof of adoption, get that proof of adoption, design for strategic acquirers, be early on, and reimbursement clarity. I think, did I?
Yeah, no, actually, that's perfect how you say it. You said it better than I did. That was when you can really make a difference in healthcare. And they did it. They did a great job.
Yeah. So Skip, you are now on the board of Channel Med Systems working with the Serene system, which puts you back inside this system, but from a very different seat. What are you seeing now that maybe you couldn't see as clearly, or maybe you're seeing it even more clearly than when you were operating day to day, as a CEO?
Yeah, well, first of all, I would tell you, the reason I joined Channel was it's a great product. I will tell you that straight up. It's an unbelievable product with a significant unmet need, right, that we can fill. But I would also tell you that a lot of my Gynesonics team is now over there, right? So we were able to assemble, first of all, Nelson, who was our VP of sales, is now the CEO.
Yes.
Our Robert Brown, who I spoke about, is our really good CFO, is now the CFO over there. Keith Shanowski, the HR officer I talked about, he's over there. Tara Murphy, who I told you,
yes,
she was our great marketing person. She's now leading marketing.
Yes.
Paul Russo, who was our best sales rep, and then ultimately got promoted and was our best regional manager. He's over there. And then we have several reps, that we really felt strong about that are over there. So part of it is the product was great. I love the leadership team, and being a part of them and wanting to stay involved with them, I think was two big reasons why I joined. To your question about what's different, I would tell you, being a CEO, it does make you a better board member, because if you're an investor, you have a certain mindset. You're not an operator, but you really do know how to run, you know how to build businesses and how to support the growth of them. But the one thing you haven't done is you haven't really been an operator. And knowing how to balance the pressure appropriately to making sure the team hits timelines and deadlines so that you don't run out of money, but also knowing that surprises happen, and what you do with those surprises is what makes the company great or makes the leadership team great. I think I've gone through a lot of that. I've made mistakes. I've been involved with really big turnaround stories. And I think, Channel is a good example. Channel's been around a long time. I think, as we go into 2026, with that leadership team and our investors, and hopefully some new investors coming in soon, I think there is all opportunity to become another Gynesonics here. And again, when you have strategics that are now getting more and more involved with women's health, I think that's going to be good. And to me, this is something where I can get to give something back, right? Gynesonics was a great success story. I love being in the CEO role. I love being involved day to day. But you work 60-hour work weeks. And make no mistake, I've done that a long time. Doing it from a board perspective, you don't have to deal with that as much, but you still have to be really involved with the business, and you have to make sure that the key milestones are understood and they're met. But you have a team, a day-to-day team that is really good at what they do, that are doing it.
Yeah.
And that's perfect for what I want to do at this point in my career.
So when you look back across your 40-year career in healthcare, what do you hope investors don't oversimplify about building in women's health?
Yeah, I think people have to recognize, like in pharma, I'll make a comment. In pharmaceuticals, it's binary. People make a huge investment, and then very shortly, I say shortly compared to medtech, shortly thereafter, it's a binary. You either hit your clinical endpoints or you don't. You either have a business or you don't, right? MedTech is quite different. Like when you think about, again, I got to say it again, all the steps that are involved with getting a product from this novel idea that somebody comes up with, all the way through to where you have a chance to scale a business and become mainstream and be acquired, medtech investors need to be aware of that journey, and they are. I mean, they do a great job. They typically, when they make, I already told you, they have a 10-year. They typically have 10-year funds, and they have an ability to go farther out. They typically do a great job understanding not only how much money they need to put in up front, but how much they need to hold in reserves, right? So I think to your question, women's health, I don't know that it should be that much more difficult if the same approach is made that they make with other, with other med tech companies. And again, BPH is the best example I have versus, heavy menstrual bleeding. If people are aware that women suffer as much as they do, because I think what happens is moms take, women like you take care of your families, you take care of everybody but yourself, right? And, giving birth, as an example, is probably the hardest thing you could ever possibly do from a pain tolerance perspective. I think people just accept that, right? And whereas men, we're not, we don't have that challenge of giving birth, right? So, the biggest pain we ever suffer is nowhere near the same scale. So I think what happens is women have a stronger voice and start pushing for change in a more outwardly way, which again has happened the last number of years. Yes. You see it all over society. I think that will make a difference. But there are investors. They just can't invest on something that's not going to ultimately get them to the point where they're acquired or they can IPO, right? Yeah. So I would say that investors, the thing I'd say is that you have to be committed to the long-range plan, and you have to have a leadership team that can get it done, right? That's, those go hand in hand. Like, you can get their money and you can have a great talk track to secure that investment, but unless you deliver on what you said you're going to deliver on, it won't be a win-win, and they'll make a change or they'll abort on what they're investing in, right?
Yes.
And that happens all the time. I mean, I would tell you, I was proud of our team. We spent their money like it was our money, all right? But at the same time, we didn't think that we could save ourselves to success, because you can't save money to get successful. You have to invest, but what you have to invest in is the right areas. And you have to be able to come back and be able to prove that what you made the investment in, that you spent their hard-earned money, was the right decision. I think I'm comfortable saying that we did that. And we've done that multiple times. And a lot of CEOs and management teams do that. And a lot of them don't, right? So that's kind of at the end of the day, that's the issue, right? That's a issue, not the only issue.
Yeah. Skip, thank you so much. This has been, for me, and I guess for our listeners as well, a really grounding conversation. I think what stays with me is how clearly you've shown that in medical health technology, progress often exists long before it shows up in the outcomes that people tend to look for. So, thank you for sharing what it actually takes to build inside that reality, from the operating seat to the boardroom and to the board where you are now. Thank you.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it. And you said something really important earlier, that middle part of the journey.
Yes. That's
the part that makes all the difference in the world, right? Because no strategics watching you. Nobody's ready to buy you. Most companies fail at that midpoint. Something happens. The product isn't what it's meant to be or what they thought it was going to be. I can tell you the best companies actually do that hard, heavy lifting. And those, in the example of Gynesonics and others, 20 years, right? We're not an overnight success. That's the irony here. Is everybody says, "Oh my God, you sold the company, you made a lot of money for your investors." It was 20 years to get to this point, right? That can't be lost on the public or investors or anybody, right? Because that's what it takes to be successful. And there's millions of dollars that go into that, Marianne, that oftentimes when people talk about pricing of products, or healthcare costs, there's a lot of things we could talk about. I'll just say, bring in minimally invasive, disruptive technology to the marketplace that actually benefits the patient in a way better than the existing technology does, is something that takes a lot of money, a lot of effort. And we need to see more and more people do that in women's healthcare.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that. Thank you. And to our listeners, this episode invites a different way of reading progress when a category is still forming. And it also invites a different level of patience with how long real value takes to surface. Thank you so much for listening, and see you in the next episode.